Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. We are happy to have such a great group here today. I see people here from all corners of the country, so welcome. My name is Sharika Bolden, and I will be facilitating today. I'm joining from the University of Pennsylvania, where I am a doctoral student in educational leadership, and we are excited to get started. So I'll start today just with a few logistics before we step in. So we are hoping that today you will have a chance to leave here with some tools that will assist you in dialogue. You'll hear a little bit. I have several members of the committee, of the programs committee here with me. And so you'll have a chance to hear from them. And then you'll have a chance to practice because we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to activate the learning that happens today. So one thing that I will note is that today's session will be recorded. I know that we are collectively going to generate some important insights, and we want to make sure that we capture those. So with that said, I am going to hand it over to Amanda to set a foundation for our learning session today. Amanda.
Thanks so much. Again, welcome everyone to a program by the DD-NRC, which if some of you haven't been with us before, you're part of our community. If you've always been with us, you're definitely part. We'll drop more information about who we are, but definitely want to focus on the content as well. And so as I think about this, we call this series, this workshop series, Meeting the Moment. And in there, we're trying to think of what does that really mean, right? And there's so many reasons to do dialogue and understand why you would talk to someone that's different, and challenge yourself and challenge others. And so I want to have everyone reflect. We're going to have some silent reflection that puts us here. You're all coming from different places across the country, and maybe you came in from a meeting, maybe you came in from taking care of a child, whatever it is, we want to make sure that you feel settled in this space. And so the self-reflection question, meaning you do not need to share it in the chat right now, this is for you, is today. So not every day necessarily, but let's start with today. How do you think about the roots of difference or of divide on your campus? I imagine, but do not know. I'm wondering if that is what brought you here, is because you want to have conversations and gather people who have different views, beliefs, and ways of communicating. And so what are those roots to you? What is it that people may be missing each other on? I'll let you interpret the rest because it's just a self-reflection prompt to land us here. I'm going to put myself on mute as well and bring us back in just about 2 or 3 minutes. The question is in the chat as well. Okay, whether you're taking mental notes or typing or writing them somewhere, please kind of finish those up so you can return to the shared space. Again, I mentioned this to those who are on the beginning, but part of why we want people to be here today is to get to be in community, community with folks that are interested in this work, who may be challenged by it, who are working in universities where maybe not everyone else is doing this. And so please do pay attention to the chat when there's anything someone says or a place that they're from, you might be able to connect with. And when you break out into rooms later, this is framed as a workshop purposefully because there will be interactive components to it, a space for you to listen and to share, because those are both integral pieces of dialogue. And so please do so with us. I am now going to pass it to Jen.
Thank you very much for that, Amanda, and thank you to all of you. And before we begin the formal process of the workshop, I just want to take a moment to say that as a member of the Clarkson community, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land before us. We acknowledge we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Akwesasne Mohawk and their ancestors. These lands and waterways connect to the vast traditional areas of the Haudenosaunee, the Algonquin, the Huron-Wendat, and Abenaki peoples, and we recognize and deeply appreciate their connection to this place. These traditional territories were never wholly surrendered and were only claimed by competing French and British crowns in later New York State. As we move towards healing past injustices, we must acknowledge the wrongs that have been done and work towards a unified path of coexistence and prosperity. We also recognize the contributions of the Akwesasne Mohawk, the Haudenosaunee, and other Indigenous peoples have made both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and territories within the country as a whole, as they continue to do so as a part of shared community. And so I know my colleagues as well extend their acknowledgements from their various campuses, and we welcome you here and just ask that we all think about the many important things we are addressing, especially as we think about Orange Shirt Day coming up in the coming week. So thank you for being here. And we're going to start by talking about the communication blockers. And so I'm going to share a slide to start, but this is very much about communication. So I will give you some thoughts about that. And then I will turn it over to my colleague to talk to you about LARA, but we're going to start with communication blockers. So give me one moment and I am going to share that screen. And if people can tell me if they are seeing a full slide at this moment. Amanda, I see you. Do I see a thumbs up from you or not at the moment? Nope. Okay. Let me stop share for a second. And let me try to reshare and see if it shows it now. Are you seeing it full screen now? Okay, thank you. So a couple of things as we look at this. I wanted to start in a place where thinking about communication blockers, so much of why we do dialogue is about we want to communicate and we want to communicate on a deeper level. Even with that intention, even with so much of the work and effort that goes into focusing on our intent to share, one of the things that sometimes happens is that we don't realize certain things are creating blocks to that communication. And so we want to take a moment and think about both things that might block communication and strategies that will help you unblock those communications. And so what are communication blockers? Well, communication blockers are these elements to either our verbal and nonverbal that silence a perspective or divert the conversation or dialogue away from a critical insight. Okay, so as you're talking to someone, there may be someone doing something, there may be something said that doesn't allow for what has been said to be fully heard or for it to be fully centered. And what you're looking to do is to unblock that. So one of the other things to remember is sometimes when we hear things or we see things, it actually impacts us in a way that we focus on that specific thing and not what is behind it. And so in terms of that, one of the things that we often see is that the action or the comment becomes our main focus versus thinking about what it represents. All right, and I'm sorry about that in terms of my phone. But as we look at this, one of the things we want to remember is, okay, the comment itself is not the main focus. How it might be silencing, how it might be diverting, that is where we want to get behind, get deeper, and really understand where we either need to get back to or where we need to elicit more response in order to bridge or unblock, right? And as I said before, communication blockers can be both verbal and nonverbal. So what I prepared for you today is a slide that looks at a couple of these elements. And so in the first block, as you look at that block, what you're going to notice is that it says verbal blockers, and these can be internal and external. And so we are going to focus more on those external blockers, but I did want to bring up for everybody that you have to be mindful, right? So when we talk about assessing self, centering self, asking questions to clarify, that's about you understanding more of where the other person's coming from, and also potentially understanding what might be bringing up an activation, a blocking for you that you need to think about why is this getting to me? All right. And so that is one of those areas where you think about self-assessing, right? You need to do that in the moment. I actually use a really simple trick that I always say is when something gets to me, I'm often thinking about why is that getting me to heat up, almost like resistance in electrical wires. I'm like, why can I not allow this to flow through, right? And when I notice that happening to me, which is different than just being nervous, like being nervous talking to you all and doing a good job, right? It's I'm upset about something or that is frustrating to me. And I start to say, okay, why? Refocus on listening to this person. Keep listening. Why are you pulling away from them, right? Why are you pulling away from this information, right? By the way, that is different than having to assess in self-care ways for this is threatening or dangerous, right? And you need to be careful. This is about you just having that conversation in a space that's appropriate. Now, the other thing is you have to be careful that when you feel that you're thinking about, okay, how am I then responding back? And is that initial internal block creating in potential communication blocker in what I say to someone or how I'm presenting myself to them? Okay. And that's a part of what you want to think about. But again, as I said, we're going to talk about the externals, right? And remember, when we get this blocker that comes up, we need to evaluate for, did it silence someone? Is it silencing individuals? Did it divert from what you were focused on as a goal together to communicate about, to discuss? Is it in say the instance of one person has said one thing, someone has responded back, and that has either diverted away from or silenced the individual who initially spoke, or maybe there's someone else in the group who that first comment was powerful, profound, they were in agreement, and the second comment did something that made them feel like they cannot then join into the conversation. So you really want to think about the dynamics of who's in the conversation and how it's impacting not only the individuals maybe directly speaking to you or to each other as if, as you're speaking as a facilitator, or that the group dynamic of it. So you want to think about that in terms of verbal blocker. But if you're in a situation where you're in a controlled dialogue and you're talking to people, you may notice that people who are not directly involved in the exchange start to show the nonverbals, right? Or as we talk about in my office a lot, our faces sometimes being loud, right? And we remind each other not to be too loud in inappropriate ways. So some of the things that you might see in nonverbal blockers would be inattentiveness, or someone distributing or exhibiting some type of behavior that appears shut off, right? Or someone exhibiting some sort of behavior that appears distressed. And of course, someone exhibiting some sort of behavior that appears aggressive. Now you'll notice that I said appears, and I should have said it before inattentive as well. Because what we realize, particularly if we think about this in terms of ability, comfort, cultural difference, many nonverbals can have other meanings. And so one of the things that you might want to think about is if you believe there might be inattentiveness, find a way to not pinpoint someone, but bring back the rule of, okay, are we all actively listening? Are we ready to move forward with what we're hearing? You know, shut off, right? Let's talk about, okay, how's everyone feeling? How are they feeling physically? Are nonverbals into this, you know, conversation showing we care about others? Is someone appearing distressed, right? Do you need to check in on someone? Is there another facilitator who can check in on that person? Do you need to verbally cue that there needs to be self-care? Aggressive, right? This one, if you start to perceive that, you should, right, evaluate. But the way you want to evaluate is to evaluate, is this person appearing aggressive, but they're not actually aggressive, they're upset, right? I've seen this with people who have high levels of anxiety, is that the way that they speak can be very direct and very aggressive, but they're actually afraid, right? They're upset, they're dealing with something. And so do they need someone to help them regulate? Do they need someone to help them evaluate? Is there a need for them to just have a moment to take that deeper breath to ground, right? So nonverbals are things that you will see as well. We're going to focus on the more specific pieces of this as verbals. So when we were talking about that, what I want to bring to you all, and I'm going to actually make the screen smaller for a second so that I can pull up some of my notes here and pull them over to another space in order to make this work. Now, I'm going to make the slide big again, and if it doesn't work, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll take it down and I'll just talk. Okay, Amanda? So in terms of some of the things that I wanted you to focus on, I've already mentioned a few of these in the sense of talking about, oh, sorry about that. In the sense of talking about, you have to think about yourself, you have to think about the person you're directly engaged with, and then you have to think about the individuals who are also in the engagement with you. So what are these communication blockers? Well, they're things that seem to show that someone is not listening, that someone is not understanding what's being communicated, that someone is mislabeling what is being brought forward. Someone could be blaming, someone could be attacking, someone could be denying what someone's saying, right? That's what can be below those types of things. And so when you think about this, some of what you're looking at are, okay, what kind of phrases often trigger that in us? So a funny, not funny version of this is if you've ever been in a conversation with someone where the person simply says to you, come on, let's be reasonable about this, right? If you ever want to see someone be really pushed towards being unreasonable, tell them they're being unreasonable, right? Another one that I know personally for me, sometimes I hear and my head goes another place because I keep trying to figure out who we're talking about, is when something gets said and someone says, well, to be fair, right? And I always finish that with, to whom? To whom am I being unfair to? To whom are we being unfair to, right? But you see how that takes you out of that moment, puts you in a different place, and it blocks that communication. Now we're going to look at a couple of examples that are a little different. And so one of the resources that I believe we're going to drop into the chat now about communication, dialogue, communication blockers, right? And the ways to respond to them is some of what we're going to work on in our session. So as we look at this, what I want you to look at is that form, and it says things about how they direct us away from what we're focused on, and these can help us get back to. So the examples of someone's always explaining away what the person just said, or someone says something and someone else says, yeah, but. And what's really great about this form is it shows how that takes us to another person or to another place. And what that particular rhetorical structure does in terms of moving us. So for example, in the yeah, but when someone says, oh yeah, but it often negates what was actually said before the but. And so a way to move away from that is to say yes and, all right? This happens to me in my group, doesn't acknowledge specific identity context to certain things, takes away that important truth for somebody. I know someone who, and they don't agree. So I know someone who shares that identity or someone who would be in that and they don't agree. That's that singular point where, again, you need to refocus on what the individual is saying and how this is impactful at that moment. So these are the types of things that we're really looking at when we're trying to understand this, right? That doesn't happen to me, so it doesn't exist, right? Don't you think that you're overreacting, you're too sensitive? Go back to what I said about being reasonable and unreasonable. They're a good person. They never meant to do that. We are not focusing on the impact of a group or individuals. We're focusing on the intent. They had nothing to do with, right, that. It's just, it didn't have anything to do with that. It's just their personality. Again, not allowing someone to explain and explore and point to the ism that they're experiencing. And again, hey, that wasn't my intent, you misunderstood me, right? Where it doesn't have the person who's responding and saying this acknowledge that someone felt that's pain from the position of what is being said to them, right? So as you look at this, I'm gonna stop share for a second and I'm gonna pull up this other slide. And I think this is a really good one to focus on. And Amanda, how many more minutes do we have here?
Yep, you have about a minute left,
Okay.
Jen.
So what I want you to do is to take an opportunity to look through that slide. I'm going to keep it off of share then, since we have only a couple minutes or only a minute. And one of the things that I want you to recognize is that you're never, ever having to be stuck in that moment, because as you look at these, and I'm going to go to, that was not my intent, you misunderstood me. When you look at the form, it says misunderstandings happen. It's reasonable to want to have a chance to clarify intent, but the blocker, like the ones that we've just looked at, turns the attention away from the impact, right? What was said and done to the intent behind what was said. So what you thought was going to happen to what was. It can also turn into claims of victimization, right? Overwhelming harm impact, right? And supposedly misunderstood. So how do we then correct that? Well, we are very open to hearing your intent. First, I hope you can acknowledge the impact, right? Easy enough phrase. What was your intent? I hear your intent was, and I hope you can also realize the impact was different, right? So allowing for acknowledgement, continuing dialogue, and also getting back to the original, there was impact. Now, when you're doing this in real time, it can feel a little heightened. It can feel like I don't know if I have a schema in order to address this, but that is what my next colleagues are going to do. And so at this point, I would like to turn this over to Kelly and Roger, and they will be explaining how in the moment, when you're seeing hot moments, when you're seeing conflict, there are ways that you can listen and come back into dialogue.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the focus on both the verbal and the nonverbal, as I know that that's a space where a lot of communication can be lost. Hello, everyone. I'm Roger Fisher. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an associate director at the program on intergroup relations at the University of Michigan, and I have the pleasure of co-presenting with a close colleague and friend.
Hello, I am Kelly Maxwell, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm a Senior Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Education and Engagement in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at the University of Michigan as well. But Roger and I got a chance to work together for years and years when we were both part of the program on intergroup relations. So it is my honor to be co-facilitating with Roger again today.
As it is mine. As Jen said, we are going to focus on a tool a process for how to continue to have productive conversations when sometimes rough or contentious or even abrasive interactions either have begun or may be possible. I'm going to share a slide, and as I prepare to share that slide, I think someone will drop a PDF in the chat so that if it's easier for you to follow along on a document than it is to try to see our slides. If you're on your phone, I know it'll be a lot easier than trying to follow our slide. Is everyone able to see the slides? Yes, wonderful. So as promised, we're going to be talking about the LARA method, LARA. For the use of facilitation of dialogue, we oftentimes add the C, and we'll explain what the C is, and also the possibility of the I or the AI as another alternative if you're in ongoing dialogue. So to begin, LARA, as it was developed, was a tool really around interpersonal communication. How do we have nonviolent, open communication between individuals who may be in conflict with one another? And even applicable to a small group setting where it's largely two people in conversation with one another. There's some ways in which it has been adapted for dialogic facilitation of small groups and intergroup small groups that we'll bring out later. One of those things is you'll notice that the LARA method does not assume a critical framework or a power conscious framework. It's quote unquote neutral in that way, but it is compatible with critical pedagogy. And in fact, if you come to our breakout room and you participate in our examples, you'll see the possibility for how you might approach that in a critical way. Okay, so let's begin with the clarify portion. And while it might seem obvious or maybe even trite, this first step of clarifying is critical. It's critical for both the obvious reasons and maybe for some of the tone setting reasons. You want to begin by checking to see if you have understood both the content and the intent of what the speaker has said. For the obvious reasons of not being misunderstood or not knowing exactly what the intent or what the content was of the person who's speaking with you, but it's also a very powerful way of seeking to understand and to humanize and to demonstrate the value of the other. Martin Buber calls it moving from the me, you to the me, thou. How do I make you a first person character in this conversation and not the object of or the target of my communication? So moving from me, you to me and thou. We'll talk more about that. I'm tempted to talk more now, but for the sake of time, we'll talk about this more in breakout. But listening then is an extension of that clarification. And deep listening, as you all might expect, encourages the speaker that you're engaged with to slow down, to not only assert or to defend, but maybe move to a posture of sharing. And that opens up the possibility of real engagement. You want that other person to move off of a place where they're feeling as though they must assert or defend to a place where they recognize that, in fact, what you're inviting them to do is to share with you. It's moving from speaking in slogans to speaking in prose. Okay. And then lastly, for my portion, you want to affirm. And oftentimes this is where we can get stuck. So you're actually hoping to express the connections that you found when you've listened, whether that's a feeling, an experience, or principle that you may have in common with the other person. Where that sometimes feels difficult is when we think that the affirmation somehow may signal agreement or even amplification of something that we've heard that we disagree with, and maybe disagree with vehemently. What's important about the affirmation step, though, is that it signals our openness and our readiness to listen and to suspend judgment, even though that judgment may exist, to suspend judgment long enough that we might have a genuine interaction with someone. It's a demonstration of our ability to do some perspective taking and try to understand from where some of these comments or statements may be originating and what might be the context for those comments. And if it's possible, to begin to develop empathy with the person who's offering that statement, but hopefully also with them in recognition of your patience in engaging with them in this process of LARA. Okay, I'm going to turn the mic over to my friend.
Okay, so I will talk about the last pieces of the LARA Clara method. And so we've just affirmed, and then we want to respond. And so this is not responding to win an argument or to shut them down. This is to respond in the way that you were listening to them, hoping they would share and open up. This allows you to respond in a way that also provides an openness for their understanding of you. So perhaps they have raised some questions when they were speaking. And so to honor the questions that they were asking you, we respond in kind to try to clarify how we see the topic at hand. So again, this is a way to honor the me, thou, the I, thou relationship, and begin to, expand the conversation. And then we expand it further by adding information. So maybe we have answered the question that they've asked, that sort of thing, but we want to share a story about how this topic connects with our own experience. Or maybe we have some factual things that we want to share as well. But a lot of times the adding information is about sharing a story that would connect this topic to why it matters to me as well, to us as well. So we've listened and affirmed that we have listened to them. We have responded to their questions. We've added our own information, maybe our own experience. And then the last thing is inquire or affirming inquiry. So we want to ask questions that reduce divisiveness. So we don't want to create those communication blockers that Jen was talking about with our words and our tone of voice, and with our body language. We want to reduce defensiveness. So we're not asking questions that overtly challenge the person's viewpoints, like, why in the world would you support this? Or, well, don't you agree that we should work toward X, Y, or Z? We're trying to do this in a way with, help me understand a little bit more. Or, I picked up on this part of the thing that you said, and I want to learn more about that. Could you share more about that perspective? So again, it's trying to open the conversation or keep it going in a way that is really building a relationship instead of breaking it down or shutting it off at that point. And so that's the basic premise of the LARA method, or the Clara method. And so Roger and I kind of want to do a bit of a role play, and you'll see it in the handout and on the slide. We're not going to read it per se, because we want to try to do it as naturally as possible. But you can read it and at least get a sense of where each of these might be coming from, each of these letters. So I'm going to be the first person that gives the statement, and Roger is going to kind of work through this LARA process. Okay. So, Roger, I heard on the news that there was another school shooting, and it's infuriating to me. Why does this keep happening? And I can't believe that there's so many disturbed kids out there that this just keeps happening over and over.
Yes, I heard about it too, and I was moved with lots of emotions, a lot of conflicting emotions as well. Would you say more about what angered you about that, and what do you mean, disturbed kids?
Yeah, I mean, I just keep hearing all about all these kids that have these issues and then they bring them to school. And my thing is like, why don't their parents understand that they're so troubled all the time? I feel like people should know that this is about to be happening. I mean, kids are on social media all the time and they're not very private about what they're saying and doing. It just makes me mad that nobody can stop this from happening. The parents, should have more control over their children and what's going on with their kids. I mean, the teachers probably know this is happening. And, I just think maybe, maybe all the teachers should arm themselves because maybe that would stop kids from bringing a gun to school. And that would end the problem because then at least those kids that are kind of messed up would at least think twice about what would happen to them if they actually brought this to the school.
Yeah, I can see your perspective on this, and what's clear to me, even in how you're expressing it, is that it's tragic for all parties involved, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it sounds like you are both frustrated and sad and remorseful and tired.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to be angry when it feels like there's not something simplistic or something obvious that we can do. Maybe you could share with me some more about some of the ideas that you said. Where do you think those ideas come from?
Well, I mean, all of those emotions are right on. I mean, it's all there and it just comes back to the surface every time I see this on the news. And then, having it happen so close to us in the last couple of years in our state and even at our sister school, Michigan State University. So, um, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, they always talk about trying to get more mental health resources. I think that's a really good idea. I mean, how do we build that up for people? And, how do we make that more available? And then how can we help parents? I don't know about the issue of all the teachers having guns. I have mixed feelings about what that could create, but you got to do something. And it seems like nobody's doing anything. I guess that's where my frustration lies, is it just keeps happening and there's no real answer.
I really appreciate that, Kelly. And I think that's a lot of people's reaction is, what is going to be a solution? What's going to be a workable solution? And if I think about what might create the most safety and have the least possibility for harm, I go to some similar places and some different places than what you've suggested. But I
Okay.
think there's a pathway for us to think about, okay, if we all want to be safe, if we all want to live without fear, and be able to provide care for those who are really needing it before they get to these tragic places, I feel some confidence that we could work that out. And people who may disagree with the first solutions that come to their minds, if we keep those things in mind about safety and care and help for those who are needing it, I have some hope that we can find something that's workable. Would you be willing to talk more about this?
I would, because, I think you're right. It is about safety and it is about care. And I do think that everybody wants those things, even though we might at first glance get at it in different ways. If we can keep that, eye on the prize kind of thing of, reducing this gun violence through safety and care, then maybe we can get somewhere.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, cut. Yes. Round of applause for Roger. He was in a little box, but I could see his nonverbals really, really well, connecting with me. So I don't know, we didn't really talk about how we would debrief this, Roger, but maybe, Amanda, how much time do we have? Do we still have any time
Like
left?
a minute.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think we're moving into breakout rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, from the standpoint of the person that was sort of agitated, I felt listened to, and Roger connected really well with like the core things and didn't get hooked into some of the more provocative things that, I was saying, and didn't go down that path with me. So, that I think it is a really important piece of the LARA method. Roger, would you add anything else quickly?
Absolutely. And as the one who was listening, I was really listening for where there might be connection and where I might signal to Kelly to not stop and to continue to engage with me and to signal that I have my own thoughts that may be in contrast with hers, but that there was room for both of us to have our thoughts.
Yep.
And that there was the possibility that we could share those perspectives in a way that might result in something that we both could agree with. Without, over promising, of course, but signaling that if we stayed in conversation, we might get to some goals that we mutually want, like safety and care, and being able to be in space that's nonviolent.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in exploring this more in our breakout room, we're going to put you to work, and we've got some examples that we'll ask for volunteers to work through.
Absolutely. And we can debrief this one a little bit more too before we begin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly and Roger. So we are going to go ahead and move into our breakout rooms. And so this is the opportunity to put into practice what we have been going through today. And so you have two opportunities for the breakout rooms. You can continue the practice with the LARA method. That'll be one option. Or the other option will be to spend some time with the communication blockers. So those two rooms should be coming up on your screen soon with the option for you to choose. It would be great if we could try to balance out the rooms a bit. We have just over 100 folks on the call. And so just try to be mindful of the size of the breakout rooms. So if we want to post those rooms, people should be able to make their selections and start moving to the breakout rooms. If for some reason there's, if you're not able to do it with the selection, just put it in the chat. Thank you, Amanda. Just put which one you want to go into, either the LARA room or the communication blockers, and we can manually assign you to that room. We'll stay here in the main chat as well, or in the main room, just to help troubleshoot. But let's see, are folks putting in? And we'll take about 20 minutes or so for this section. All right, so some folks are putting it in the chat. That's perfect. Thank you. Wonderful. Looks like folks are making their way into the rooms or letting us know in the chat which room to move them into. So that's perfect. All right, wonderful. See, we are coming back in the room. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I had a chance to pop into the rooms and saw some great conversations happening there. So great to see that. And so if you would, as you are coming back, if you could, in the chat, put something that you took away from today, one thing that you took away from today, one way that you will activate your learning in the coming weeks. We want to make sure that we take what we've generated here and think about how to integrate that into our daily practice. So that's the second thing, one way that you will activate your learning. And then the third is one way that you will hold yourself accountable for those actions. So we'd love to start to see in the chat how you are planning to start to apply what was discussed today. All right, so we are coming back together as a group. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. And let's take a moment now to think about how we will extend this learning and integrate it into our everyday practice. And so the prompts are, what is one thing that you've taken away from your time here today? What is one way that you will activate your learning in the coming weeks? And how will you hold yourself accountable for those two actions? Great.
I just want to mention that the C, we've said the C is clarify. So it's really making sure you heard the other person and know where they're coming from. But sometimes people say the C is centering. So you've just heard this stuff that you don't agree with. How do you center yourself or prepare yourself to be in a place to engage with some things that you haven't agreed with? So that's another way of thinking about that C to start the conversation. You can clarify what they're saying and make sure you understood or heard them the way that they intended to be heard. But you can also think about, I need to take a deep breath. I need to think for a moment before I dig into this process of listening more deeply, and et cetera.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you all for putting into the chat what you're taking away and how you're planning to move this forward.
And if I may, to add to what Kelly said, we did talk a little bit about there is a C that's centering and it has to do with some of the de-escalation. And I'm going to drop into the chat for our breakout group, but for everybody, the script I used, and that shows what I would have said next after we thought about who we were and what the facilitator was going to do. And one of the things is frankly, to start with, a little bit of centering for everybody again, when there's a communication blocker, as well as what Kelly and Roger have talked about with the clarifying, right?
Great. And I'm seeing in the chat some great commitments here. One around really internalizing what was discussed today. I see a commitment to continue the learning, which is great. A commitment to practice, which is so important. Excellent. So before we move to close, I do want to allow us some time to think about, so how does this apply in a virtual context? And so what we've done today, so far, let's think about how that applies if you're having virtual conversations. And so I want to hand it over to Grant and Libby to give us some thoughts on how do you apply this for virtual dialogue?
Libby, would you like to go first, or?
You're up.
Okay, I will go first. So hi, everyone. My name is Grant Jackson. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Tech University in the higher education program. And one of the main things I study is intergroup dialogue. And as I became a faculty member, it was around COVID. And so we have dialogues that had been facilitated, for years or decades, traditionally in person, suddenly needing to switch to being facilitated online. And so it kind of just raised that question in my mind. I thought it would be important to think about, what are the different kinds of opportunities and limitations or challenges associated with doing these kinds of dialogues online. We struggle to even imagine it. At least many people I talked to, it took a moment for us to kind of imagine what that would even look like. And so I and some colleagues conducted some studies on online dialogues with some qualitative studies with students, and which are still under review and or accepted, but still in press. So they're not ready yet to be sent out, but they will be soon. And really was looking for kind of, the kind of this open beginning general question of like, what are the opportunities and limitations associated with this? What does it give us? And I will paste in that resource right now that kind of summarizes that. And what was interesting in thinking in terms of opportunities and limitations was kind of the categories that emerge as we interviewed students about their experience. Four sort of main categories that are kind of blurry, they kind of blur together, but so what we call technological opportunities and limitations, and then pedagogical, and then intrapersonal and interpersonal. The technological looking at things like little things, cameras and mics and breakout rooms and chat features. Pedagogical considerations, so the use of visuals and sources and sharing screens and slides and those kinds of resources. Also, from a pedagogical standpoint, the translation of in-person activities to some online, and how do we do that, or do we do that, or should we abandon those activities? The interpersonal opportunities and limitations spoke to things that were happening between people, and then the intrapersonal opportunities and limitations spoke to what is kind of happening within people in terms of their thoughts and their feelings and perceptions. What was also interesting is how we went in looking for opportunities and limitations, but then quickly realized that most things were both an opportunity and a limitation, right? So if you think about, I don't know, the chat feature, it's not difficult to imagine how that provides an awesome opportunity that's not available in person, but could also present challenges and be a limitation. And then the thinking being that, as facilitators doing this online, we want to be thoughtful about how we can take advantage of those opportunities while mitigating those limitations. In terms of the implications that emerge from that, I guess there's kind of three main categories that emerge is things that we would do in practice well before a dialogue even begins. Things we would do like on day one of the dialogue, or perhaps at the very beginning of the dialogue, if it's just a one-time dialogue, and then things we would do throughout a dialogue, right? So before, in preparation, on day one, really establishing certain norms and cultures, and then what we would facilitate throughout. Obviously, there is more to learn, so that there's a 2-page resource that I pasted in the chat. It doesn't claim to suggest that we've got it all figured out. I think this is something that the dialogue community needs to keep looking into and thinking about and studying. But I hope it's useful for you right now and meeting the moment and the time and climate that we're in, but then also, you know, useful thereafter as well. So glad to be able to share that, at least briefly introduce it. I'll throw it over to Libby for any additional thoughts that she wants to add.
Thanks, Grant. I think you've covered it beautifully in the handout, so I won't spend much time on it. I do agree with Manda. I mean, I think most of the things about good dialogue are the same, online or in person, right? The need to establish trust with folks, the need to respond in all the ways that we've talked about today. Yeah, I think he's covered it in the handout. I think I'll just speak to the fact that they'd asked me to mention the book that we offer you free online. If for those of you who wish it, there were some questions that were raised earlier about in-classroom teaching. I've just put into the chat the link for a free online handbook that speaks largely, almost exclusively actually, to teaching in the classroom. And it was developed a while ago, but it offers a wide range of possible strategies for engaging students in controversial topics in the classroom that mostly are useful, I think, for faculty who don't have the luxury of actually teaching dialogue in a longer term way. I mean, if we have the ability to engage our students over time in these deeper ways, it is preferable. But many of these strategies are offered to faculty who will tell me, I don't have the time to do all that. I'm not an expert in communication. I'm not an expert in dialogue. I'm not going to become one. And we're offering them a host of ways still, because we owe it to our students, particularly in these incredibly challenging times, to address important topics. So I offer it to you. I'm happy to talk with people more about it if they're interested, but it is a great opportunity, I think, for faculty in particular to use it, and other folks can. The strategies and skills in the book are transferable, and it's designed for easy use. It's a book like this that, if you get the hard copy, has a binder on it that can make it possible for you to just use it as you need it as you're planning for your classes. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful, thank you. Another great resource. And so as we move to closing this afternoon, we actually want to make sure that we are leaving you with several resources. So Amanda will be putting some additional resources into the chat as has been happening throughout the session. So more resources are coming your way via the chat. And I also want to point out that today's session is part of a series. And so we have a 3-part fall series. Our next session will be on October 17th. That session is focused on navigating trauma-informed dialogues. That'll also be in the afternoon, 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll put that registration link in the chat. And then our third session, please keep an eye out for a date soon. But that one is going to be planned to be after the elections. And so how it will provide us an opportunity to talk about how do we continue to facilitate communities of care post-elections. So keep an eye out for that. So we are going to move to close the session today. I do, again, on behalf of the programs committee, want to thank you all for your participation. We appreciate that you saw fit to spend this Friday afternoon with us and to spend it thinking about how to facilitate those difficult dialogues. If you are joining from the University of Michigan, if you're here in that group today, please know that you have an additional session following this, and we'll put that link in the chat for our University of Michigan members. And finally, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to say a few words before we close out today. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. A round of virtual applause or thank yous for everyone that contributed to today. Truly, in the least cheesy, most true way, it takes a village, and it took a team to make this, from all of the facilitators and all the people who are doing the background work, and people from different universities that, like, I imagine most folks here are doing multiple jobs in life, both unpaid and paid. So we honor everyone's effort today, and the fact that you also came on a Friday afternoon, right? It feels like no time is perfect for everyone. And that is why we recorded parts of this session, not your breakout rooms, so that other people can benefit from this, and you can go back and share it with teams.